Imagine stepping onto a stage where the audience is a firing squad, the spotlight is a searchlight, and the wrong note could cost you your life. In 1944, a Paris nightclub singer named Fania stepped into that impossible theatre, Auschwitz-Birkenau, where a women's orchestra played at the edge of the abyss. She arrived shorn, starving, and barefoot in the snow. Hours later, she was ordered to sing Madame Butterfly and accompany herself on a Bechstein. The conductor was Alma Rosé, Gustav Mahler's niece, and the verdict would decide whether Fania lived or disappeared up a chimney. This is the story of the orchestra that played for time. The convoy from Drancy took days. Packed into cattle cars, 100 people sweated, suffocated, and fought for space around a sloshing bucket they called a toilet. Champagne and foie gras from friends, absurd luxuries saved for the journey, turned to nausea in the dark as panic bred rumors. Machine guns in the night, electrified wagons, a work camp with gardens. The train finally halted beneath blinding searchlights. Doors crashed open. Guards shouted, "Raus! Los! Schneller!" Living skeletons in striped uniforms tossed out luggage and bodies alike. 2 columns of 50, men one way, women another, marched through snow toward a brick arch marked work camp. It was a lie. This was Birkenau, Auschwitz's engine of extermination. At reception, everything human was stripped away. Uniformed women barked orders as Polish prisoner workers hacked off plaits and pubic hair with nicked blades, laughing at the fallen braids like trophies. Needles tattooed a number into Fania's forearm. 74,862, showers, a rag of a slip, a summer dress with a yellow triangle, men's shoes, several sizes too large. Then the quarantine block, 1,000 women crammed 3 tiers high in wooden cages called kojas. The stench of death in the straw and a latrine pit so deep that a slip could mean drowning in filth. In this first night, Fania understood the new law. The strong stole, the weak vanished, and a dead woman could spend the night among the living without comment. We had arrived at the journey's end. Hell. Fania Fénelon playing for time. The next morning, a shouted word sliced through the noise. "Butterfly!" A hulking Polish capo was hunting a singer. It sounded like a joke made to lure the gullible out for a beating. Fania climbed down anyway. She insisted she could sing Puccini, she could play the piano, she had studied with Germain Martinelli in Paris. The giant rolled her eyes but led her through snow and wire, past blocks where notables, those useful to the SS, lived warmer, cleaner lives. Inside a heated hut with a stove and electric light, the sight was surreal. Music stands, mandolins, guitars, flutes, and a gleaming grand piano. Women in pleated skirts sat in quiet rows, instruments in their laps, faces pale but alive. The conductor stood on a small platform, tall, precise, impeccably self-possessed. Alma Rosé spoke French with a German edge. "Do you play the piano?" "Yes." "Then accompany yourself." Madame Butterfly. Barefoot, Fania touched ivory keys with hands still dirty from the block, ashamed and grateful at once. She sang Un bel die, then a German song, Wenn es Frühling wird. Her voice steady where her body shook. Silence, then the only verdict that mattered. "Ja, Gott. I'll have you in the orchestra." Fania seized the opening and demanded a miracle. "Take my friend, Clara." Clara was huge and deformed by starvation edema, but she had a lark's voice. Alma, cold as a magistrate, weighed the risk, then snapped to a guard, "Fetch Clara." Minutes later, Clara sang, and the door opened for both of them. Survival, in Birkenau, sometimes hinged on a single note. Privilege here was never kindness. It was a calculation. The Lagerführerin of the women's camp, Maria Mandel, tall, flawless, ice-blue eyes, hair braided like a crown, stepped in unannounced, and the room locked to attention. Mandel listened, smiled faintly, and ordered, "Dress them." In the clothing hut, a grotesque boutique stocked with the possessions of the murdered, Polish women tossed slips, stockings, and dresses across a table. Yellow stars were sewn on with angry stitches. Shoes, though, were a problem. Fania wore a size 4. The capo sneered that such a size did not exist. Mandel went white with rage and swept out. Fania stuffed paper into Oxfords several sizes too big and stumbled back through slush, shoes sucking free in the mud. This was the bargain: music in exchange for breath, cleanliness for display, food for function, all of it precarious. Morning in Birkenau began with a whistle and a wound. The women's orchestra formed up by the gate, instruments clutched like lifelines, and played as columns of prisoners shuffled past, out to factories and fields, back at night to collapse into kochas. The music was supposed to regulate the march, impress visiting officials, and, if you ask the SS, inject joy into labor. In truth, it was a metronome for survival. The origin of this ritual lay with Camp Commandant Rudolf Höss, who had earlier installed a men's orchestra. The women's ensemble was created to mirror that show of order and culture. Twice a day they played outside for the deportees, then inside for the SS. Privilege in the music block didn't erase the camp, it only sharpened the contrast. The orchestra shared showers with the camp's aristocrats, interpreters, Canada detail, runners, because the SS demanded any woman who might come near them be visibly clean. Soap was a marvel, a towel an event. The same day, the Lagerführerin, Maria Mandel, strode in unannounced and turned the rehearsal hut into something out of a perverse boutique, a box spilled over with shoes, a commander kneeling to fit boots on a prisoner because my little butterfly must keep her throat warm. The girls watched, stunned. Even Alma froze at the sight of the women's camp chief on one knee before an inmate. Fur-lined boots appeared like a stage prop, proof that aesthetics, when it served the regime's theatre, could trump the camp's logic. Clothing came from the mountains of confiscated luggage: underwear, stockings, a navy dress, a warm coat. The orchestra was dressed to be looked at, stars sewn on with hostile stitches. Shoes remained scarce. When Fania said she wore a size 4, the capo exploded that such a size didn't exist in Auschwitz. Mandel's face went white. She swept out rather than accept the absurdity. The message was obscene but clear. Produce beauty on command, and the machinery might bend around you for a moment. Inside the block, the girls tried to manufacture fragments of normal life. Little Irene drew Sunday programs for the ladies and gentlemen, garlands and birds and lilac, that did not exist on that plateau of mud. Alma adored the idea, anything to elevate the ensemble. Meanwhile, Panifunia's delousing rounds and the terror of lice governed their scalps. Nothing so frightened the SS as parasites that might cross the lines of privilege. Hunger undercut every gesture. At night, even the strongest woke weeping for bread. Mandel had told Alma, more than once and in front of the orchestra, to ask for what she needed. The girls wanted the same thing every creature in the camp wanted: food enough not to dream of it. Rehearsals were relentless. The magnificent Bechstein that had greeted Fania on the day of her audition was quickly seized for the officers' mess, leaving the pianists to copy parts and the ensemble to grind through marches and operetta medleys. Alma, Mahler's niece, daughter of Vienna, was implacable with intonation and tempo, pounding insults in German over wrong notes while relying on Fania's musician's eye to spot where the score went off the rails. Madame Butterfly returned again and again. So did Peter Kreuder and Franz von Suppé, music curated to flatter German ears. The camp itself bled through every bar. New arrivals meant smoke, and sometimes the orchestra's windows faced the truth head-on. One afternoon, a quarrel snapped open into confession. A girl pointed at the chimneys and said that was where her parents had gone. My father out of the right chimney and my mother out of the left. If that sounds monstrous, it's because the camp trained people to speak the unspeakable in sentences. The conversation ended the way so many did there, with silence, and then the order to rehearse. Hope arrived like a rumor and stuck like a song. Mahler, Zimmetbaum and Edek Galinsky escaped. Disguises, forged papers, the complicity of bribed SS men, and a stoneware basin carried on the head like a pass. The camp hummed with revenge fantasies and liberation timelines. For days the girls played lighter, marched straighter. For once they were singing for themselves. The crematoria still poured smoke and reality still ruled, but the rumor gave their throats air for a week. Then came a name that crushed oxygen: Himmler. The Reichsführer SS was to inspect the camp, and the orchestra became a factory. 20-hour days, a program polished to a military sheen, the Merry Widow medley, 12 minutes by Kreuder, an aria from The Gypsy Princess, Kreuder again in reserve, and, if he wanted an encore, Clara's Nightingale. Alma prepped them like a conservatory jury, posture straight, eyes front, play in tune, do not look at him. Pride and revulsion split the room. If this is what she does for Himmler, what would she do for Hitler? Someone muttered. The girls were too tired to argue. On the appointed day, they mounted the platform beneath a pitiless sun, instruments shivering in hands that never warmed. Himmler's visit was the regime congratulating itself. The old story still circulated. After an earlier tour, he had demanded more dogs and fewer emotions. A cleaner extermination line capable, he complained, of killing more than 6,000 a day. Bureaucracy as annihilation. That was the ear they were meant to please. They waited an hour on the platform, baking beneath a merciless sun, the camp scrubbed into a grotesque stage. When Himmler finally appeared, a small, pinched figure with Clark's glasses, the downbeat came and the Merry Widow filled the air, a waltz stitched to barbed wire. The set list had been drilled to exhaustion, a Merry Widow medley, Peter Kreuder's 12 minutes, an aria from The Gypsy Princess for Lotte, Souper in reserve, and, if the Reichsführer wanted more, Clara's Nightingale. Above all, play in tune, Alma had warned, posture straight, eyes front. It was art as discipline, not consolation. In the women's eyes, the visit was obscenity dressed as ceremony. The legend of his earlier tour circulated like a fever, standing at a gassing, ordering lashes on bare backs, insisting that the killing line run cleaner and faster, regretting only 6,000 a day. Bureaucracy as annihilation, cold, incremental, proud of its throughput. And now they were soundtracking it, the orchestra elevating cruelty with phrasing and time. He is the mastermind of death, Fania would write of Himmler. The phrase still scorches. After the review, nothing was different and everything was worse. Rehearsals became coercion in 4/4, Alma's baton a metronome that ignored smoke and hunger. She lived for the score. The girls lived through it. The room itself could turn surreal, the chief of the women's camp stepping in with a baby, blue sailor suit, chocolate-smudged mouth, cooing with maternal delight. A week later, according to prisoners' whispers, Maria Mandel took that same orphan by the hand to the gas. The girls argued whether this proved madness or doctrine. Fania's verdict was harsher. A fanatic had no right to give her heart against the party's will. To the orchestra, privilege meant light, heat, soap, and the illusion of terms. It also meant complicity you couldn't wash off. Still, an orchestra in a camp like this, Clara murmured, half-dazed. The answer came back bitter, to give work through joy, to regulate columns leaving at dawn and returning at dusk, to impress men whose uniforms made murder look like work. Even the creation myths of the ensemble carried a sting. A men's orchestra first, then, because order loves a mirror, the women's. The girls were to be pretty, clean, on pitch, and available. The camp was the client, the SS, the patrons. Alma stood at the center of this contradiction. She was ruthless about tuning and touch, a perfectionist who could forget the chimneys in pursuit of a phrase. She was also a shield. When the Bechstein vanished to the officers' mess, she improvised. When voices cracked, she swapped repertoire. When the SS circled like bored cats, she made the room seem like a conservatory. But devotion and danger danced too close. One night she dined with Frau Schmidt of Canada, the warehouse of stolen lives. By morning, Alma was dead. The SS called it poisoning. Rumors multiplied. Frau Schmidt disappeared. Alma was lucky she died of an illness, just like in ordinary life, one girl whispered, and the orchestra felt newly orphaned. In the silence after her death, the question was merciless. Would the orchestra be dissolved or simply bent to a new hand? The girls pressed Fania to step forward. She had coached parts, read scores at a glance, soothed flare-ups. For a moment, hope trembled like a held note. Perhaps they could keep the thing that, however contaminated, had kept them alive. Outside, the routine didn't pause. Columns trudged past to a thin march. Dogs yawned. Smoke unspooled into a clean, indifferent sky. The orchestra tuned to A and waited for a baton that no longer belonged to Alma. Kramer's verdict fell like a dropped baton. Sonia, a taciturn Ukrainian pianist, would replace Alma. The room inhaled hope and dread in the same breath. She stepped up, blue eyes fixed on the score, raised her arm, and beat time into empty air. Entrances missed, parts collapsed. Big Irene tried to hold the ensemble together and failed. Sonia shrugged and beckoned Fania to help. In practice, that meant Fania reading and shaping the music from the first stand while Sonia pretended to conduct. It was survival theatre now, stripped of pretense. The orchestra had lost its spine. The girls clung to one another and to routine because routine, even a bad one, kept you in the land of the living. The camp's pageant of power marched on. A door would open, and with it the temperature in the room. Irma Grace's icy gaze, Maria Mandel's measuring glance, or the smooth entry of a handsome surgeon with a movie star's smile. When Josef Mengele came to hear the orchestra, the set list was dictated like a prescription: the Butterfly Duet, Schumann's Reverie, Tosti's Mattinata, and The Charge of the Light Brigade. The girls, against all logic, felt themselves straighten under his attention, old reflexes twitching back to life. He listened, joked, departed at the first bars of the final piece, leaving the musicians with the nauseating aftertaste of having performed for a man who selected with a nod. Outside, a different performance unfolded. Two women hurled themselves onto the electrified fence as the orchestra played on, the SS laughing softly at the spectacle. The bodies jerked into grotesque shapes against the bright air, and a third girl with a stool pried them loose. The march continued. The music kept time. After Himmler's visit, Hungarian transports swamped the crematoria. Smoke hung like a ceiling you could not breathe through. A capo pressed a single rotten egg into Fania's hand for the lovely concert, and the orchestra joked because it was that or choke. It was, Fania wrote, a synthesis of life in the camp. Comedy, suicide, heroism, and an obscene reward, all inside 2 hours. Even the rules of selection mutated into theatre. SS Tauber, it was said, once lined up 1,000 naked women in snow and flicked their breasts with a whip to separate the firm from the doomed. The interpreter led the spared back inside. Every woman in the room touched her chest that night and measured her odds. The orchestra slept on those thoughts and woke to a new humiliation, a catafalque of lilies for Alma, the SS filing past in tears to salute a Jewish musician they had used and now revered. There were always flowers for a corpse, even when there was no bread for the living. We were in complete communion, Fania Fénelon playing for time. The question that followed had no music in it. Dissolve the orchestra or keep the illusion running? The answer arrived in Sonia's flailing beat and Fania's quiet triage, cutting parts, cueing entries, writing out arrangements that German ears would tolerate. The women took turns believing in a future measured in half steps. The truth stood at the window, a horizon of wire and towers, the wind pushing a sickly sweetness from the chimneys. When someone whispered that Alma had been poisoned after dining with Frau Schmidt of Canada, no one bothered to pretend surprise. In Birkenau, motives were a luxury. Alma was lucky. She died of an illness, just like in ordinary life. Fania Fénelon playing for time. The rumour mill gave and took in equal measure. It had given Mahler and Edek's escape. A week of lighter air, real posture, a reason to count to 4. It took back consolation in other ways. Sonia kept the title, Fania kept the tempo. The women learned again the old camp arithmetic. Privilege equals proximity to power. Proximity equals danger. Music equals labor. Mandel tested the membrane between public cruelty and private sentiment with a baby she dressed in blue and paraded like a miracle. A week later, the baby was said to have been led by Mandel herself to the gas. The orchestra argued the meaning and then fell quiet because meaning had no rations here. Time thinned. Winter's howl softened to mud. The orchestra still played marches at the gate, still sat straighter when officers entered, still passed soap in grateful silence. Slices of normality. Little Irene's hand-drawn Sunday program with birds and garlands for the ladies and gentlemen, stitched together hours that might otherwise unravel. The Bechstein was gone to the officers' mess. The ensemble rehearsed on splintered benches and a memory of resonance. Fania copied parts until her fingers cramped, learned to read the SS mood by the sound of boots outside the door. She was the orchestra's pulse now, whether the baton admitted it or not. Then the ground itself moved. Evacuation orders. Carts loaded, files formed, names counted, miscounted, counted again. Birkenau, its routines and atrocities, fell behind them like a stage after the curtain. The destination was Bergen-Belsen, a camp of hunger more than smoke, where work details and disease did the culling and dogs patrolled new perimeters. The orchestra arrived as a rumour more than a unit. What returned was a scatter of women who still recognized one another's silhouettes at dusk. They were issued nothing that fit. No stove, no tables, kosher stacked 3 high, and a word that drifted like ash, Arbeit, while factories took what the Reich had left of their bodies. Separation cut deeper than cold. Those who owned shoes went to the cellophane works. The barefoot were sent to the woods to clear trees, and everyone understood the logic. Factory meant a sliver of shelter. Woodcutting meant infection and a fast fade. Selections were now disguised as assignments. Florette and Clara were made capos, a perverse promotion that made sense only to a system that weaponized every human bond. Fights flared and died. A joke could save a minute, so could a lie. The orchestra tried to rehearse, but the word dissolved in the damp air. The music had been downgraded to a memory device, something that reminded them they hadn't always lived by numbers. On some nights, Fania still sang. There was no piano. An old drum served as a heartbeat. When news seeped in that the front was moving, that Germany was shrinking, voices rose without being asked. The women imagined armistices and trials, and then they imagined bread. They imagined opening a window and hearing a bird. On the worst days, even imagining was work. We had a different wind. Summer with its harvest of victory was already singing in our hearts. Fania Fénelon, playing for time. Liberation wasn't a trumpet fanfare. It was a crackle on the air and a taste in the mouth, metallic, unbelievable. First came quiet, then engines, then British soldiers with hollow eyes and a wartime BBC microphone patched to a generator. A young man with good manners asked Fania to sing for the BBC, and someone pressed 3/4 of a used lipstick into her palm like a decoration. She sang God Save the King, and hard men wept. She sang the Internationale, and the Russians, skeletons in striped rags, stood and remembered how to be a chorus. They stirred, rose up, grew taller. They had become men and women once again. Fania Fénelon, playing for time. After the first rush, the questions came, not all at once, but in waves. What had the orchestra been, really? A shield? A trap? Both? Fania's answer refused comfort. The music had been a lifeline woven out of compromise, discipline rented to monsters in exchange for another dawn. That is not absolution. It is an inventory. She kept the facts like ledger lines, the uniforms picked from murdered wardrobes, the Sunday programs that flattered killers, the catafalque of lilies for Alma while trains arrived outside. She kept, too, the names: Alma, Clara, Little Irene, Big Irene, Jenny, Ewa, because names pull people back from smoke. In the months that followed, the orchestra scattered to lives that did and did not take. Some married and ran shops. Some took stages again. Some were buried by cancers and memories. Clara found a bit of television and then an early end. Little Irene did not live long. Others, like Ewa, found work in theatres and a way to push air through their throats without tasting ash. 2 locks of hair, Mahler and Edex, rest behind glass in Auschwitz today. The rumour of their escape hardened into relic. Survival makes accountants of us all, who came home, who did not, who kept their hands, who kept their voice. What remains is not a tidy moral, but a method. Hold the note even when the hall is a barbed wire yard and the audience wears skulls on its caps. Understand the price because there was always a price, and pay it with your eyes open. Let the last words be plain. The mastermind of death was coming to gloat over his victims, Fania wrote of Himmler. And yet she sang, and yet they played, and yet some of them walked out alive. The camera of history should not look away from that contradiction. It should hold, steady and quiet, until the truth fills the frame. We were enshrined in a thick smoke, and yet a different wind was blowing. Fania Fénelon, playing for time. If you are watching this, you already know that a platform like YouTube can carry both spectacle and witness. This story refuses spectacle. It asks for witness. Sit with the discomfort that a waltz once played as a convoy died. Sit with the fact that a woman sang and saved a friend in the same breath. Then do something very simple and very hard. Say their names aloud and let them take up space in your house. If the next person learns those names from you, then the orchestra has found an audience it deserved from the start. Thank you for staying. If the subject matters to you, pass it on, not for clicks, for memory.